Ruth, nice to meet you. I just wanted to ask you first of all about your run for mayor, the mayor of Chandler, and how that's going and what made you decide to run.
Well, it's going very well. There's been a lot of enthusiasm. People are ready for change. And I think that it's been a great campaign season for me. So I'm really happy about that. I decided to run for a multitude of reasons. On a personal level, we have a son, my husband and I, that passed away from cancer. And after he died, I thought, what can I do to bring meaning to my life? Because he did more in 17 years than I'll do in 80. And I really felt a calling to be involved in politics and to make a difference in my community. And so this is something I feel very much, I guess the best word is it's a calling to do. And so that part of it is personal. On a more professional level, we lived in the area for many years, and then we moved out when my son was sick. We had to take him to specialty hospitals. He had brain tumors. But once he passed away, we decided it was time to come home. And when I came home, I saw how things were here in Chandler, and I was really sad by it. I see a rise in homelessness. I see our leaders not taking care of the police, not hiring, and I saw a lack of transparency, and I thought, we can't let things continue the way they are. I feel very strongly that our city is on the precipice of change, and if we don't make this change now in leadership, I don't know where we'll be in 4 years. So I decided it was time to get in and get work done, and I have the time, so.
How are you different than current leadership?
Well, I'm a very strong conservative, and I have very strong convictions about what the role of leadership is. I know both my opponent and I are Republicans, but I think we have a very different view of those Republican ideas. So I believe that we are accountable to those that we lead and those that we're working for. And because of that, we need to make sure that we're making decisions after we listen, after we take the time to talk to the people and get their input and make decisions that work for our community. We cannot base any of our decisions on our own personal biases or special projects or legacies. This will never be my legacy. This is a chance to serve. And so for me, I see that role very differently.
You spoke about the homeless situation in Chandler. Can you expand on that and let me know your thoughts, how you would deal with it, any plans you may have for our future, and tell us a little bit more about the current situation in Chandler, Arizona.
Okay, well, this is one I have a big heart for. I have a sister who spent years living on the streets, and so I have a heart for the homeless. But I believe that as a mayor, I need to be looking out for the interests of our city. That's my responsibility. Right now, we have a serious problem with the homeless, 2019 to 2020. So when they counted in 2020, our homeless population here in Chandler rose 38%. What makes that significant is that Maricopa County rose 12%, which is about the national average year over year. So our rise in homelessness was 3 times higher, more than 3 times higher in Maricopa County. And so that's a crisis. At that point, we should have stopped and said, what are we doing? Why are our numbers rising significantly more than others? At that time, however, no changes were made. The same programs were continued to be worked on, and the problem didn't get any better. And at that point, it was shocking. We knew there'd be a large rise because of the missed year, but Maricopa County went up 34%. And I thought, we're going to be up like 45%. I was really nervous about it. And then I waited, and the data was never released on our city site. All the other cities had their data. Phoenix went up 33%. I believe Glendale or Tullison went up 30%. Those were the average numbers. So I requested as a candidate for the information. I said, I need to know the PIC count. It was shocking. Our numbers went up 76%. We were more than double any other city in the valley. that's a crisis. You know, we still don't have near the homeless that Phoenix does. Of course, they have the largest population in the state right now. But our population rising at that rate is not something we can continue to manage. It will bring in, and it has brought in, so many problems to the city. We have encampments. I get phone calls all the time from citizens going, there's a new encampment that just popped up. And we call it into the police and they clear them out. And 4 days later, they're back there again, or they're at a location a block away. I went last week and filmed, I took pictures. There was an encampment up on Alma School and Warner, I believe it is. Yeah, Warner. And it was heartbreaking. There are 2 preschools. They're separated by an empty field and a block wall. There was an encampment between the 2 preschools. There were bags of alcohol bottles. There was a glass Crown Royale bottle just dumped in bushes. There were drug paraphernalia. A very common thing that the homeless do for drugs is they use these little nitrous containers and huff them because it gives them a pretty quick high. And there was probably 200 nitrous containers sitting in the parking lot of a preschool. That's a problem. The budget approval for Operation Open Door is $1.35 million. Now, some of that money is CARES Act's money. Some of it is coming from the CBGD funds. I never say those alphabet numbers right, letters right. And a chunk of it comes from our general funds with strings attached. However, a greater problem is that anytime you take any grant money, anything, it will say on the grant that there is a certain percentage of that grant set aside for administration costs. That is money for salaries. So you end up with the person who is making these programs for the city, they're incentivized to bring more homeless in and get more federal dollars because that raises their own salary. And that's where the mayor needs to be in charge. He needs to be leading, and I intend to be leading. I intend to be out there every day working, sitting in on these meetings. I've been attending all of the meetings, and I have not yet seen, in all the time I've been doing it, a single mayor, a single member of our council or our mayor attend any of these meetings. The staff right now has pretty much free reign. They run these meetings, they plan these programs, then they present it to the mayor and council. The mayor and council, it sounds good, but it sounds good to say we're helping the homeless. You know, you want to help, but they don't realize what they're missing. When you attend the meeting and start asking questions, it becomes very apparent. And so you'd have to talk to the mayor about why he's doing what he's doing. But as far as I'm concerned, it is not a Republican value to give without expecting something in return.
So what is the solution? How do we make people accountable so that they can get out of this situation? They have no incentive currently. Talk about that.
The best thing that we can do is to have accountability. So you give a man dignity when you give him a choice. If you say to the homeless population, if you do A, B, and C, we can provide you with this, then you're giving them a chance to make a change in their circumstances. You're giving them something to fight for, to make that change. And not everybody's going to want to do that. But there is a large section of the population that just needs help. And we can offer that, but it cannot be a free ride. Also, on our end as a city, every program we have should have metrics, and we should have accountability. We should be saying to people, to our own staff, we expect you to make this metric. So,
during the pandemic, there was a lot of damage done to businesses and churches. For future's sake, if we have another pandemic or disaster, what role do you believe government has, an ability they have to shut down businesses or churches or things of that nature? A lot of businesses have this concern that government has overstepped.
And I think that's definitely the case. But when the pandemic began, our city closed down businesses and left the libraries open. So we had librarians that were, on the basis of what they were saying, you couldn't have your business open because of the risk. They gave that risk to the librarians. and it was a big problem that they had. Eventually, they shut everything down. But I believe that businesses should not be hampered. I do not support mandates. I do not support this idea that of all things that we should close ever a church. That is something that we don't have the right to do. We need to make sure that business flourishes, that people can worship, and that our Constitution is upheld. That's really important to me.
Is it ever okay for the police with a search warrant to take firearms from citizens?
Well, if they have a search warrant, it depends on where that warrant came from and what the basis of it is. But I am a strict constitutionalist and believe in the right to bear arms. I do not believe the government should be taking our weapons. I do not believe they should be regulating this idea that we're going to tell young men that at 18 they can go to war for our nation, but they can't buy a firearm. That's wrong. We need to make sure that we protect those liberties and we uphold our Constitution. It's kind of funny that you brought it up because I recently had a situation where I was actually able to support the Constitution. My daughter was in the hospital for 3 weeks at Phoenix Children's. She has a chronic illness and she was ill. And when we first got there, we'd been there for a couple of days, and when it became apparent that she was going to be in for a couple of weeks, we asked for our bishop to come. He got to the hospital and was turned away. Phoenix Children's was telling all clergy they were not welcome and would not allow them in the door. Now, my kids gave me a hard time because I pulled my copy of the Constitution out of my purse. And I stood there holding it in the air saying, no, you can't do that. You cannot deny my child the chance to meet with her spiritual leader because you don't think it's safe. There was no rhyme or reason to it. Eventually, they told me, well, we'll make an exception for your child. And I turned to them and said, no, I want every child. I want every rabbi, priest, bishop, any spiritual leader to have a chance to meet with these children. And I brought up the fact to them that I happened to already know, because I had asked, that they had not one COVID patient in the hospital at that time, but they had a whole floor of children struggling with mental and suicidal issues. And I said to them, how do you deny those children the one person that could make a difference in their life today? And I continued to fight. I was blessed that I was having breakfast with the governor 2 days later. And so at breakfast, I brought this to the attention of the governor. We got the head of Health and Human Services involved, and they told the hospital, cease and desist or we'll sue. And it took 4 more days. They fought it. But after 4 more days, I'm proud to say that they came down to me and said, our policy has changed and no clergy will be denied entrance. That's what our Constitution is about. It's about protecting our rights to have a gun, to go to church, to speak as we want, to be able to prosper in this nation. And at no time should any government, any hospital, anyone take those rights away.
Police in Chandler, and tell us about that situation.
So this is another large problem that we have. 13 years ago, there was a problem with the state pension fund. So the state monitors the pension fund for all of our first responders, for our police and fire and the like. Well, they had made a mathematical error and every city was short millions of dollars. I know that in Phoenix it was $1 billion they were short. So every city pretty much stopped hiring police for 3 years. They said, we've got to figure out how we're going to repay this money into the fund. After about 3 years, all the cities went back to funding and hiring. But Chandler never did. In the last over 10 years, we have not hired an officer. We haven't even accounted for some that have left, so we haven't even covered the attrition. So we have less officers today than we did in 2008. The exact number is 333. Now, due to public pressure, they did hire 3 officers, but they have not started yet. And what's really frightening isn't even that we only have the 333. It's that 84 of those officers are vested in retirement. Right now, our officers work mandatory overtime every day. I know one of the SROs at the high schools, and he works 3 hours of overtime minimum a day. Nobody can keep that up. And yet, that's what our officers have been doing for years. A year ago in April, so a little over a year ago, our chief of police went in front of the city council, and he tried so hard to ask them, to beg them to support the police. He went so far as to look the mayor in the eyes and say, "We're just tired." About 30 officers came to support him, so there was a large group of officers because he's an at-will employee. So going public and asking for help. The city funds the officers to go into the school. So that is something we provide as a community safety measure. We provide the police. We also provide things like when the schools build, we provide land and do the zoning. Right now, we're at build out with schools. We won't really have any new schools built. We may have some of the older schools rebuilt, but not new ones.
Another topic in Chandler is the Non-Discrimination Ordinance. So for the NDO, your current competitor, Mr. Kevin Hartke, opposes this, and you support it. Can you expand a little more on why you support this ordinance?
Sure, and I know this is really controversial. A lot of people are very divided. This has become a very political issue, but I'm going to put it in some very simple terms. It comes down to deciding what's best for our city, and let me explain that to you. This year, in our legislative session, there was at least one, I believe 2 bills introduced to make the NDO state law. Now, if you go and read those bills, they're negative. They have high penalties. They would be very costly to businesses. They require businesses basically to remodel their business to create a different environment. So they are very negative and would have a negative impact on our city. But it comes down to this. If it's taken up by the state legislature, we're going to be forced to do whatever is passed. At this point, those bills did not go through simply because they were so radically sided to one side. We are the last of the 5 big cities in the state to not have the NDO. Once we pass an NDO, the onus is off the state, and it's easier for the legislature to say there's no need for us to take this topic up. It's been decided, and then they can move on to other things. That leaves the governing of Chandler in Chandler's hands. Remember, the NDO is not something we have to accept, it's something we write. So the Non-Discrimination Ordinance is something we can write in our city that will best serve our city. If we want to say, if there's a problem, it has to go to mediation, we can do that. We can write whatever works for our citizens. But in agreeing to write an NDO, we take the future of our city in our own hands. And since this is something that has been supported by the business community, we can allow them input so that whatever we write will have the input of our citizens, our business community, and will work for us. It comes down to wanting our fate in our own hands and not to be allowed to have the state pass something down that might hurt our city.
When you say our fate, I worry that our very liberal Chamber of Commerce, who supports liberal candidates and philosophies, and that they'll have a big impact or a big say on how we write this. That would be a concern of many conservatives in Chandler.
Well, I can tell you I didn't get their endorsement. And there's a reason for that. So, I understand that we have a Chamber of Commerce right now that is very liberal, and that's a major concern. But remember that we're going to be getting input from our citizens as well. And again, it's something that we can write before anything is passed. It would be written, then we would be going to our citizens and putting it out there for people to have input. So it's going to come down to something that, again, works for us. I just think in the end, I would rather have our city be governed by us. And the Chamber of Commerce is only one member of our city. They're not the driving force in every decision.
Well, all the other Democratic candidates do also support this MDO, and that's something you have in common with them. So for a lot of conservatives, that's of concern. Do you have any concern for businesses and how they might be treated and how this could be a liability and extra added cost to them in the future? For example, the Colorado baker who was sued and had to incur costs because of his religious beliefs, the Masterpiece Cake Baker in Colorado. I mean, what's to protect a religious business owner or someone with religious values?
That again comes down to how we write the ordinance. We can write in the ordinance, if we choose, an exception for religious bias or basis. Bias? For a religious basis. So we have the opportunity to write it. The NDO is only going to hurt us if someone else writes it. That's the problem with letting the state do it, because then we have to follow whatever they put in. Heavy fines, again, modifications to businesses. We don't have to include any of that. We could have mediation and have people come together if there's a problem. I also know that this ordinance has been available in the state of Arizona in different cities for almost 20 years. And in the 20 years it's been in the state, there's only been one case that went to court. And in that particular instance, the business won. So there was no cost incurred to them. So we need to make sure that when we write the ordinance, it works for us. That's why I don't want the state to make this decision for us. And I know that's controversial. Hopefully we will have people on our city council that will work for what's best for our city and not for a personal agenda. Publicly endorsing any candidate. They all have good qualities, and I think I could work with anyone that's running. There are some that I think would do better than others, but we're just going to have to see how that race comes out.